Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Little Orthodox Max Kolbe channel. This is another entry in what will probably be an ongoing series called Atheists Always Lie. Sorry if you're an atheist and you take that too literally, but that said, I want to point out to people that we're going to look at various subject areas where atheists do that. Please give us a like, please give us a subscribe, please support us financially if you can on our various funding vehicles. We are soon going to be announcing, I think, another new website as well that's more specifically religious oriented, but we'll see what we see. In the meantime, I want to also point out to you a few things that will be useful today. If you have a look on the Escaping Atheism channel, I'm sorry, the Max Kolbe channel, which is where we have to put all of our Escaping Atheism material right now, you will see quite a few interesting things we've been doing. But the ones that probably are of most interest here will be the interview with Mike from Inspiring Philosophy. He has one of the best, most scientific, and most admirable YouTube channels I've ever seen. And it's a great interview. I'm going to mention a couple of his videos here to you today as well. I noticed the one, God Ends Physics in Neurobiology. We had a conversation about that some time ago. So do check that out. All three of them, Interview Inspiring Philosophy, Part 1, Part 2, and there's a Part 3. I'll get them together on a list for the channel as soon as I have time and energy. You'll notice the first in this series of Atheists Always Lie was right here, Atheists Always Lie number one, Near-Death Experience. Now, I'm going to repeat very briefly that if you go ahead and watch that video and look, or listen to that video and look at the reference materials on the screen near the end there, you will find there is ample evidence, scientifically peer-reviewed by responsible, legitimate researchers, showing that near-death experiences are real and cannot reasonably or plausibly be written off as the chemical effects of a dying brain, wish fulfillment, etc. Scientifically, it's dubious to make that claim. All you have to do is look at the materials I recommended to you and ask questions and go look at the information in the available peer-reviewed research. So when they tell you that there's no evidence, the near-death experiences can be whisked away, no, they cannot. No, they cannot. There is substantial, they don't match any of the criteria claimed for delusions, wishful thinking, and so on. They're in active denial on that evidence. What's doubly interesting is that this evidence, the near-death experience, the medical tracking survey, the other scientific studies that have done extensive and copious interviews with the patients and weeded out frauds and all that sort of thing, that's just one area. It's what's called it's called medical tracking. It's how they do a lot of drug research. It's how they do a lot of research on surgeries and that sort of thing. On the other end of the physical body perspective, on the other hand, it turns out in neurology, in the field of neuroscience, we also have ample evidence to back it up, evidence that you have what people would call a spirit or a soul. There is genuine evidence for it, and that the soul would be responsible for, it'd be responsible for a number of things, but it would include will. Your very will to do things would come from the soul, because neurobiology cannot explain will. It cannot also explain memory very well, except in certain primitive ways they can map how the brain stores memories. But having mapped the entire brain, they cannot even explain memory very well. They cannot explain, they can explain emotions, certain emotions, at least the physical manifestations of emotions, but they cannot explain awareness, consciousness, will. It's simply a fact. In fact, even if you Google something called the hard problem, just those three words, the hard problem, you'll find that the number one problem still in a number of areas of biology is this very problem. It's the problem in artificial intelligence research too. Will, the actual choice to do things, cannot be explained anywhere in biology, can't be explained anywhere in physics. The best the materialists can do is hypothesize about random effects at the chemical, at the quantum level and stuff like that, and try and make it all random. But no, in fact, quite a bit of evidence just says, look, most of your mind is just not physically in your body. Some you'll see some, some materialists, some dedicated hardcore atheists, dedicated hardcore deniers of the evidence will try to, hem and haw and say, well, it's not just the brain, it's the central nervous system, and really it's every part of every nerve in your body and the whole body, really. And that sounds a little more rational, but in the end, no, you can't even explain the evidence away from there that way. There's too much evidence that we actually have a soul, and it's in neuroscience. I'm sorry, but it is. I'm going to recommend some videos for you to go and check on your own time. The reason is simple. Thereby, again, Mike from Inspiring Philosophy. It's a great, great YouTube channel you should be subscribed to. It's a real inspiration to me and a lot of other people, especially a lot of science nerds. It's a 4-part series. The first one starts with the case for the soul, and all by itself, that video should move you. I'm going to repeat that Mike uses peer-reviewed sources you can go and look up, and he provides those sources. And he's really good at answering challengers, at least people who are serious, not, snotty evidence-denying atheists, but people who are serious, who want more research or want to ask questions. He's usually pretty good about answering. He knows his stuff. See my interview with him. He's a terrific guy, too. So I'm going to recommend that if you want a detailed look at this neuroscience that demonstrates that the mind must be outside the soul, it must be outside the body, get to the 4-part series, The Case for the Soul, starting with part 1, The Case for the Soul. In The Case for the Soul, he goes into all kinds of things that have been documented in the peer-reviewed literature, contemporary research, never debunked, just ignored research, showing that the brain cannot possibly do everything that the materialists, so-called scientific naturalists, claim it can. And I'm going to suggest then you go look into his step 2 there, The Case for the Soul, Refuting Physicalist Objections. By physicalist, he means materialist, physicalist, and even to some extent naturalist, all pretty much mean the same thing. And what those words mean, the materialists, the physicalists, the naturalists, is they have a dogmatic faith belief that everything we see in the world can be demonstrated through natural processes. And when they say natural processes, they mean physical stuff doing physical things, nature doing what it does, growing trees and forming star clusters and all those other things that you see. They believe everything we see in reality can be explained that way, as emergent effects of physical processes. Well, this is absolute nonsense on its face. All you have to do is think about it. As I've said many times, if you think everything is a result of natural processes, please explain why. Please explain supernatural things like logic itself, just plain logic, as well as mathematics, geometry, will or to do things, the ability to decide and do things, the will to do so spontaneously. This and many other things are simply things that cannot be, it's not just that they can't be explained in current science, it's worse than that for the materialists. It's worse than that because when you try to explain it in material science, you just get gobbledygook. It doesn't work. Every effort fails. Everything points to the idea that there's things outside of nature, outside the laws of physics, beyond the laws of physics, in some cases most likely running the laws of physics. Scientific naturalists don't like this. Scientific naturalists are materialists. Scientific naturalists sometimes call themselves physicalists. Any of that is, none of that is science. All of those are schools of thought and philosophies, and they're all pretty close to the same thing. I mean, you can be a materialist and not a naturalist, but I don't know how you'd quite do that. But in any case, it's all terminology that means the same thing. You either believe everything can be explained physically, or there's things beyond the physical, and I don't mean electromagnetics, I mean beyond light, beyond the entire light spectrum, beyond all of electromagnetics. beyond all that, beyond the all the quanta, the physical quanta, the atoms? Is there anything beyond those that is real? It's really not hard to ask that question, and it's really actually pretty hard not to start saying, oh, actually it seems very unlikely that everything has a physical explanation. How could that be? And I'll repeat again, as your own exercise, try and figure out how mathematics work at all if everything is an outgrowth of physical processes. And by the way, if your answer is that math is just something we sort of project onto the universe that just kind of happens to work, I want you to think real hard about that. Think through the implications of saying that we make the math work with our minds somehow, and stop and consider the possibility that mathematics works whether we're there or not. And there's no physical explanation for mathematics. The universe just obeys them. Okay, anyway, that was a long-winded explanation to explain to you what a physicalist is. It's a materialist, it's a naturalist, and by the way, virtually all of them are atheists. And you're a scientific naturalist, you lean atheist, or are an atheist. Same if you're a physicalist, same if you're a materialist. There are some spiritual materialists, but they're pretty weird and unusual. There's a weird variety of materialism in Mormonism, for example, but remember that Mormonism is very much a minority of a minority religion. It's very small, and most Christians find them and their beliefs odd, just so you know. But even Christians who don't like each other can agree there's, issues there. Most religious people are not. The Hindus are not materialists or naturalists. The serious Buddhists never were. There's all kinds of philosophical theists or people of various philosophical bents with no religion, don't even like Christianity in some cases, but they think there's a God, and they can tell materialism is just plain dumb, because it is. Everything is not the result of physical processes, and it's also absurd to suggest that nothing can exist beyond what physicists can verify exists. Think that one through too. Every time you think about empirical evidence and what it means, what they're often just trying to tell you is that if a physicist can't verify it with his tools, it's not real. And there's no way that makes any sense either. So that's a good video in the series as well. Mike then has a third video in that series that I'll just mention, and he goes in quantum biology or quantum physics. The only objection I'm going to give to this is that I'm not always convinced that just because somebody has a theory, it happens to be true, right? So the soul might indeed, and there is evidence for this, the soul might indeed be well explained by quantum physics and quantum effects. Again, if you look at this video, you'll see that Mike's got a lot of evidence for that. Lots of peer-reviewed studies you can go look at for yourself if you don't believe him. Don't let anybody snow you on he doesn't use peer-reviewed scientific resources. Yes, he does. Go look at it. Again, I would only just say all of this could be wrong, and quantum physics is just all sexy these days, and maybe we'll eventually find something that supersedes quantum physics, or maybe quantum physics is totally real, but there's other explanations beyond quantum physics for things like souls and other spirit forces. But it's pretty interesting how even in this area you start finding evidence for the supernatural, the transcendent, the divine, even in current science. Actually, kids, you find it all over the place. And another dirty secret, by the way, is a lot of physicists, people who study physics, are spiritual, and a lot of them become spiritual studying physics. It's just the truth. I'm also going to recommend a couple of other videos here. I'll actually do yourself a favor and search for the word neurotheology. Neurotheology is a growing field of neurology researchers, neuroscience researchers, who are also theologically inclined and work with very serious academic theologians in their work to figure out how to do things. A lot of this starts with a guy named, worth looking into, named Andrew Newberg. Dr. Newberg, here's his homepage. I'm going to try and get all these into the links in the low bar when I'm done. Here's his homepage, where you'll see he is one of the world's experts in the field of neurotheology. And yes, I'm sorry again, folks, to tell our atheist friends, but he's a real working scientist. with the respect of his peers. Of course, he has critics. Everybody does. I would point out, however, once again, what all this points to is not necessarily that all this science is right. The great danger of relying on science is that science can be overturned at any time. And in my view, and the view of many others, the more solid evidence for God is the classical evidence that's always been there, that we've had for thousands of years. See people like Aristotle, Plato, Aquinas, and many, many, many others. In fact, just Google up something called 20 proofs for God or 20 classical proofs for God. You'll see that Peter Kreeft's got a good page up on that. In any case, I'm going to recommend a few other things for y'all to think about, and then we're going to close this up. This is another book, again, quantum physics. I have a little star on quantum physics. I don't doubt quantum physics. I just think limiting our scope of inquiry to it is dangerous. However, this is a good book to look into. The Physics of Angels, exploring the realm of where science and spirit meet. Rupert Sheldrake, again, a very credible researcher who's turned in quite a bit of fascinating research in the peer-reviewed journals. He's a very respectable scientist. He's not just and he shows how things Thomas Aquinas was writing 800 or so years ago about physics matches how we would see spirit forces interact with the physical world in quite mind-blowing ways, actually. Thomas Aquinas was incredibly logical and brilliant. And again, this is not to grab this and this sort of material and say, this is the real truth. No, 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 no. This is to give you some idea that there's other ideas out there. And if you're genuinely interested in science, you should look into these things. Here's another book that's not even by a religious person that I'll recommend. Dazzle, Gradually, Reflections on the Nature of Nature, by one of the world's most distinguished evolutionary biologists, a lady named Lynn Margulis. Read her. She's unbelievably brilliant and was beloved and respected of her peers in both Russia and the United States. And she was pretty much a materialist atheist. However, she tended to think freely on many things, and she had wild ideas about life and its origins and how it communicated with each other that go completely beyond. I mean, she would note things that were just not easily explained. She also had no patience at all for the idea that evolution is driven by survival of the fittest, and acknowledges, even though she was in no way a creationist, she was kind of a snotty atheist, to be honest, but she admits over and over again the problems in current evolutionary biology to explain things, because that's what an honest scientist does. She also has her own interesting theories which even, if you read her closely, it seems to be her ultimate idea is that life itself is like one of the forces of physics. Like, we have gravity and the strong force and the weak force, and she doesn't ever propose this clearly, but if you read her close enough, she sees life almost like a force unto itself. And things she points out about the way life communicates and life evolves and moves on its own, and the way it is more cooperative than it is competitive. It's just fascinating reading if you're at all into the sciences. And again, and she trashes selfish gene theory and what's called Neo-Darwinism. And she trashes it so well because it's a joke. It really is. Random mutation and natural selection cannot account for the diversity of life we see. They simply cannot. It's a pseudoscientific claim to say they can at this point. Another thing I might just point out, in terms of looking at who's interesting out there, here's more Rupert Sheldrake. I do really like the guy. The Presence of the Past, Morphic Resonance, and the Habits of Nature. Now, Sheldrake is wildly spiritual in his theories, even of how the universe itself works. I do not endorse his morphic resonance theory. I really do not. I have no strong opinion on it except that it is provocative. The thing is, his views wouldn't be compatible with some of what, for example, Lynn Margulis said, but some of it would be. And more to the point, again, if you're into science, and there is more out there than you think, and there is more to think about and actually explore in science once we accept the idea that the supernatural is real and may be thought about and experimented upon, because it can be. Finally, I'll close with this. please go check out, do this quick search. I typed in just on Skeptiko Neurology. Look for talks he has with so-called with real neuroscientists, but who are obviously dogmatic atheists. They call themselves skeptical, but they don't say skeptical of what, so get skeptical with them. And how people like Stephen Novella and this Harvard neurologist who's denied all the near-death experience research and tried to explain it away, he can't. The guy's full of it. In fact, every atheist, so-called skeptic he's ever gotten into a conversation or debate with, he's trashed them because these people are ideological. It's important to close on that too. I'm going to repeat that atheism is ideological. And if you get a response from an atheist of, it's not ideological, it's just lack of belief, note what a rote response that is, and then start asking them about things like the evidence in neurobiology that our minds are outside of physical space. Ask them about that evidence. And if they immediately try to explain it away, get skeptical of them and point out that they're taking an ideological position. Similarly, if somebody dismisses the near-death experience data, get skeptical of them and say, by what right do you dismiss this or call it not evidence? You may explain it in some other way, Mr. Atheist, if you wish, but how dare you say it's not evidence? There's evidence of a soul. There just is. Real evidence in current science in multiple areas, in neurobiology and near-death experience research, both. Deal with it, guys. It's just the truth. There is evidence. As always, you may choose to dismiss the evidence, but if you say there's no evidence, you lie. All right, everybody. Thanks a bunch. Please give us a like. Please give us a subscribe, and we could use your financial help too. Thanks so much. God bless.